All right. So it's a little after 7, so we'll go ahead and start this March meeting of the Woodlands Green Sustainability Lectures. I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight, taking the time to join us. Always appreciate taking that time. And I said, always, one thing about these lectures is that I never watch one without learning something. And that's the whole thing about these lectures, is to educate and spread the word. I just have one announcement. That is, next Thursday, you can go to the website. You can look for Thursday of next week. There's a member and board meeting on Zoom. You can click on that and join us 5 o'clock. We'd like to have you there, whether you're on the board or not. We appreciate the input that you might bring. So I think, without further ado, I'll introduce. I do want to mention that, as usual, we'd like to hold our questions and comments until the end of the session. When Kat is finished, then we'll try to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak, comment, or ask questions. I always have one. That's what I do. So I think just try to save your questions, put them in chat as we go along, and then between myself and John and Terry, we'll make sure that we get to try to get everybody's comments out on the tape. So Kat Christensen is with the Woodlands Environmental Services Department, and she's the Sustainable Landscape Coordinator for that group. And we're pleased to have her. She has an MS degree and a Bachelor of Science degree in forestry from Stephen F. Austin in Nacogdoches. And she's going to talk to us about 7 particular species of butterfly that are around here in our area, what we can do to help keep them here and make them propagate and promulgate. And also touch on the fact that one of the other things that Woodland Greens concern itself with is invasive species. And she'll talk about the effect of, we know that most of it's detrimental, but she'll talk to us about how, in fact, it is a negative impact on butterfly. So, Kat, if you want to go ahead and start the slides, and we'll go.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Paul. So as Paul stated, I'm going to be talking about supporting native butterflies in your own backyard, creating habitat and feeding them. I do kind of speak a little fast, so feel free to not take notes. This PowerPoint not only can be given to you, but this is recorded, so you can always go back and rewatch it if you missed something. You can always feel free to contact us if you have any other questions about it. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and begin. I do have a little brief agenda of just what we're going to go over in this PowerPoint. First is going to be ecosystem degradation involving invasive and non-native species. Then I'll talk about how native plants are essential in our ecosystem, why we should garden for butterflies, and then, as Paul stated, 7 common butterflies and how we can provide for them. So let's dive in. All right, so do you know the difference? What I want you to focus on for this slide is the difference between native, non-native, and invasive plants. Native species are species that occur naturally in a particular region, ecosystem, or habitat without human introduction. Non-native species are species that do not occur naturally in a specified geographical area. And invasive species are species that are non-native to a particular ecoregion or environment, and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm. Non-native invasive are not interchangeable terms, and so that's the point I'm trying to get across. All invasive species are non-native, but not all non-natives are invasive, if that makes sense. And I'll be giving a few examples of these in the next couple of slides. So first, I'd like to go over ecosystem degradation, how these invasive and non-native species are going to affect our environment. Non-native and invasive species are now fairly common in the United States, and they're compromising our nation's biodiversity. These species can impact both the native species living within an ecosystem, as well as the ecosystem itself. Indirectly, invasive species may cause native species to decline due to resource competition and habitat alteration. Invasive species can alter carbon and nitrogen cycles and even fire regimes in invaded ecosystems. And when it comes to the world's biodiversity crisis, as many as 1 million plant and animal species face near-term extinction because of habitat loss. And honestly, we are part of the problem. And so let's talk about understanding invasives and non-natives and the risk that they pose, right? So how and why were they introduced? Because we just realized that only native species occur here naturally. So invasive species can show up in an ecosystem in many different ways. It could be a governmental agency, an agricultural department, contaminated seeds that you've bought online. It could be brought over by ship accidentally, but most likely someone somewhere thought it was a good idea to have that species here. So let's look at some of the examples of species that were brought here for a specific reason, but have pretty much doomed us ever since. So what I have pictured here is King Ranch bluestem. You may or may not be familiar with this species, but it was introduced in Texas in the 1920s and the 30s because it was a desired species to combat erosion. The plant by nature is drought resistant. It established itself quickly, which made it super popular among farmers during the Dust Bowl. Unfortunately, though, this invasive grass has negatively impacted plant species diversity. And despite their abundance, they have pretty much minimal nutritional value and have been observed to diminish grassland bird diversity and abundance by reducing insect diversity. The overall threat with King Ranch bluestem is that it can severely decrease animal diversity, but can also carry along the red-streaked leafhopper, which could potentially decimate sugarcane crops in the United States. So while it was brought here to combat erosion, it's created much more of a problem than we had originally thought. The next one you might be more familiar with, and that's elephant ears, otherwise known as toro. And it was introduced in the United States in 1910 as a substitute crop for potatoes. And later it was cultivated as an ornamental. This is a very popular plant for homeowners as it stands out in the landscape and it's easy to establish. Unfortunately, if you've ever been any wet areas around here, you've probably seen it, is that this species invades wetland areas, forming really dense growth pockets. And thus it outcompetes native species, altering the natural habitat and ecosystem processes. And then the last one, I'm sure we're all familiar with, or hopefully we're all familiar with this tree, because it is one of the most invasive species in the United States today, and that's Chinese tallow tree. The story that I was told, and the story that is told to others, is that Benjamin Franklin brought this tree over from China in 1776 as an ornamental tree. And in the 1900s, the USDA promoted planting Chinese tallow tree in the Gulf Coast states to establish a local soap industry, as it's historically been used to make soap and candles. But since then, its primarily use has been for its unique ornamental qualities, including its colorful fall foliage. Unfortunately, as we all probably know, tallow tree has tremendous reproductive potential. It can mature in as little as 3 years and remain productive for the next 100 years. One mature tree can produce 100,000 seeds annually. And to top it off, its stumps can resprout. And it also has a very deep taproot, allowing it to withstand severe drought and then outcompete our native species for resources. With its ability to utilize minimal water sources and its comfort in growing in really crowded spaces, native plants are often quickly eradicated in areas where Chinese tallow is growing. But invasive species aren't the only ones that are bad. Plants that are well adapted, that may be great in your garden, are usually bad for the ecosystem. Typically, invasive plants and non-native plants are quick to reproduce. They're fast growing. They can thrive under a variety of growing conditions, and they can establish themselves quickly to a large area. These factors play a large role into why they are so desirable. In fact, a lot of ornamental plants seem to be well behaved, and they don't show signs of being aggressive until they do. And then they explode into our environment and become uncontrollable. Chinese privet, for example. This species was very well behaved in yards and gardens for years, and now it's taken over and is identified by many groups as an aggressive and troublesome non-native species. Now, you would think crepe myrtle is the tree of the woodlands with the amount that we have planted. However, crepe myrtle is non-native, but it's a very well-adapted species. Crepe myrtle is native to China. It was introduced in the late 1700s and became quickly popular as an ornamental yard and street tree. These trees have beautiful flowers, as you can see from this picture. They have really cool, attractive bark that's unique. They're drought tolerant and they grow very quickly. The problem is that crepe myrtles reseed themselves. And like many non-native species that reproduce prolifically like crepe myrtles, it can become invasive. If left unchecked, these plants will outcompete our native species. This species is also prone to insects and diseases, much more than our native alternatives. And while the flowers produce pollen and are beautiful, they provide very little nectar, which makes them unappealing to most pollinators. And with the sheer amount that we have here in the woodlands, crepe myrtles take up a lot of real estate and offer little to no value to our environment. So it's important to know before you grow. You can find safe alternatives to invasive and non-native species by learning about the native plants in your area. There are many of native trees like eastern redbud that offer the same thing that a crepe myrtle does, but more, and are better for the environment. So here I have a list of some common invasive species that we have here in the woodlands. It's not all of them, not by far, but it is some common offenders. And if, as you're reading this list and you think of one of the species that you have, it's best to probably remove it as soon as possible and replace it with a more native species. Also, if you're interested in learning more about invasive species, their impact on the environment, and how you can get rid of them, then our department has an upcoming event, Invasive Species Workshop, and that might just be the class for you. The QR code will take you to the registration form for the class to sign up. And if you have any questions about the class, you can direct them to Terry or myself at any time. So native plants or non-native invasive plants are bad. So what's the alternative? Native plants. Native plants are the most powerful tool in our conservation toolbox. Without increasing their use and protection, we fail in our conservation efforts. This is a quote by Doug Tolleman from the University of Delaware. And when I read it, it really resonated with me because he's right. If we can't preserve and protect our native plants, then we essentially are failing. We're failing our environment and we're failing our ecosystem. So Kat, why are native plants so powerful? Well, native plants are adapted to the local climate and soil conditions where they occur naturally. These important plant species will provide nectar, pollen, seeds that serve as food for our native butterflies, insects, birds, bees, and wildlife species. When native plants thrive in their original environment, they create a natural habitat for wildlife that is both beneficial to the environment and adds life to your outdoor space. We think of obvious pollinators like bees, birds, and butterflies, but these native plants can also help create homes for small animals, warm and cold-blooded, and microscopic organisms that are in our soil. And all these living things have a job to do in our natural environment, and that's promoting a symbiotic relationship. So you may be thinking, yeah, Kat, native plants are great, but Lowe's and Home Depot don't have them or sell them. So where do I get them? I know that finding native plants is not easy. Trust me, I create a lot of pollinator habitat and it is hard to find native plants. It takes effort. Nurseries and garden centers are not always going to label plants as native versus non-native, and you can frequently find invasive lookalikes for sale. So I recommend doing your homework. If you're interested in a certain native plant, look it up online. Be sure to know its scientific name so that you make sure you're getting the right variety. I have some places here where you can buy native plants where I frequently shop. Lindsay's Native Plants is a good resource. Native Plant Society of Texas has their native plant sale at Woodlands Landscaping Solutions every fall, and they have a wide variety of native plants. Nature's Way, Asklaw's Ace Hardware on Kirkendall is a good place. I also have 2 QR codes here. One is to Woodlands Water. They have a great resource for low water use native plants that are suitable for our area, and all plants on the list qualify for their water bill rebates if you're served by Woodlands Water. And then the second one is the Native Plant Society of Texas, Native Plants by Ecoregion. I'm not sure if everyone on the Zoom right now lives here, so I just gave it to, had the QR code shoot you to their homepage. You can pick your ecoregion and decide from there. But being a smart plant shopper is one of the first steps into creating native habitat for butterflies. And so why should you garden for butterflies? Well, here I have 6 different reasons that I think are important for us to garden for butterflies. First is going to be conservation. Many butterflies are declining due to habitat loss and pollution. By creating butterfly gardens, we offer them a sanctuary to feed, breed, and thrive. Excuse me. 2 common butterflies that are facing population declines are going to be the monarch and swallowtail species. Monarch populations, if you don't already know, have decreased more than 90% in the past 20 years. And these declining numbers are attributed to habitat loss and degradation, loss of its host plant, and excessive herbicide use. Swallowtail populations have seen varied declines in different regions. Factors that contribute to their population decrease include, again, habitat loss and pesticide use. In particular, to them, it's urbanization and agricultural expansion have led to the destruction of their larval host plants. So conservation, #1 reason as to why we should garden for butterflies. But second is pollination. And I know bees are often considered the most important pollinators due to their abundance and their efficiency, but butterflies too play a crucial role in pollination, just in a different way. Butterflies typically pollinate different types of flowers than bees. They have longer tongues that can reach nectar and deeper and more tubular flowers that bees cannot. And so it opens up a whole era of pollination for a different set of plant species that truly need butterflies for pollination. Butterflies can also travel much longer distances compared to bees. They can facilitate the genetic mixing of plant populations that are spread farther apart. And butterflies are also considered indicator species, meaning that their sheer presence, absence, or well-being in an environment indicates the health of the overall ecosystem. Their sensitivity to changes in the environment makes them an early warning sign for ecological changes. And if those aren't good enough reasons, education is another good reason to garden for butterflies. Butterfly gardens can function as a dynamic classroom, both for adults and children. In these spaces, you can observe their fascinating life cycle firsthand. They offer tangible lessons on metamorphosis, which is an essential concept in understanding biological processes, not to mention the native plants and the benefit of education that offers. And one of the most important reasons to me is probably biodiversity. When you garden for butterflies, you really truly are gardening for so much more. It becomes a haven for many different beneficial insects that all play a crucial role in pollination and pest control. A butterfly garden will also attract a variety of birds that are drawn in by the insects and the native plants that are there. The diversity of this flora and fauna will enhance the garden's ecological fabric, contributing to a more richer, balanced ecosystem. And now my probably favorite would be wellness. It's one of the reasons I like to garden, because the tranquility of watching butterflies flutter around, as you saw in my beginning slide, and them landing on flowers, it offers a unique form, in my opinion, of natural therapy. It fosters a sense of peace and connection to the natural world. And this interaction with nature not only is going to revitalize the garden, but it rejuvenates the gardener, contributing to the overall emotional and mental health. I can't tell you the amount of research papers that Terry and I have seen that say how trees and native plants and native wildlife really do impact your overall emotional and mental health. And now maybe you're saying, Kat, I don't care about it. I just want a pretty garden. Well, there are plenty of beautiful native trees and native plants that will support native butterflies and still maintain that crisp, clean, conventional, pretty garden. So now that I've convinced you why you should create a butterfly garden, what do they need, right? You're just starting out. Well, I have separated this into two categories. We have their primary host, or their primary needs, and then their secondary needs. Primary needs you absolutely have to have if you want to see butterflies in your gardens, and secondary needs is things that can't hurt. They'll not only they will just help you get more butterflies to come to your area. And while flowers are great for inviting pollinators to visit, host plants are how you get them to stay. And for those of you that don't know, host plants are the plants that an organism, in this sense, the caterpillar, will live on and live off. They are a vital part of the pollinator life cycle, where female insects are going to lay their eggs and where the larvae which hatch will feed, and it's the place that they'll really call home. And host plants are going to greatly vary, depending on the butterfly species. Think of caterpillars as picky eaters. They're only going to eat specific plants. And so I'll go over some of the common butterflies and their host plants later on in the PowerPoint. But while we're on the topic of host plants, if you take away anything from this presentation, it is that host plants are meant to be eaten. This is the whole point of having a host plant. I can't tell you the amount of times that I, myself, or any of my coworkers get a call from residents saying, well, I planted milkweed and the caterpillars are eating it. Well, that's the point. They're going to eat the leaves. So if you see your leaves being eaten by caterpillars, it's a good thing. So just keep that in mind. The second primary need is going to be nectar plants and their need for butterflies. While host plants feed the larvae, nectar plants are going to feed the adult butterflies. The important part of picking good nectar plants is making sure that you provide nectar throughout the year, right? You can't just give them food March through August. It's got to be the whole year. And so incorporating nectar plants with different bloom times is extremely crucial. And then lastly, butterflies need shelter to roost for the night and protection from wind and rain. Shrubs, vines, trees, fences, they're all ideal for just that. An overgrown area to a butterfly represents their natural habitat. Thus, it's attracting them and providing them with protection, which brings me to their secondary needs. I already discussed protection from wind and rain by having trees and shrubs or a fence, but the same structures could be used for their chrysalises, which is necessary, especially if you have their host plant in your garden. So having structure in your garden pretty much kills 3 birds with 1 stone. Now, like all living things, butterflies need water to survive, which is why I didn't have that on here. But they also need minerals to stay healthy. Butterflies use their long tube-shaped tongues to suck up essential salts and nutrients from moist soil and puddles. And if you're worried about having mosquitoes in standing water in your yard, I get that. But you can always set out a dish with some dampened compost or manure for butterflies to get their minerals. If you've ever been to one of my booths, you might have seen the poly pool, and that is what that is representing. There are also, though, quite a few species of butterflies that rarely, if ever, actually visit flowers. And I know that's shocking. But instead, these species feed on tree sap, overripe fruit, scat, and decomposing animals. And examples of these butterflies include the red-spotted purple, question mark, hackberry emperor, and many others. Now I get it. Most people don't want to add piles of dung or roadkill to their butterfly gardens. However, that doesn't mean you can't put out a plate of rotten fruit to attract these butterflies. I will say that while butterflies are attracted to overripe fruit, you still have to change it out every few days. And then, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the use of pesticides is one of the main contributors to declining populations of monarchs and swallowtails due to habitat loss. They go hand in hand. Pesticides and insecticides, they not only harm these species' host plants, but can have negative impacts on the caterpillars and their eggs based on the amount that they were exposed to. So it's pretty simple. Play it safe. Stop using pesticides in your home, in your garden. There are definitely natural alternatives that don't negatively impact butterflies that can be utilized. And now most of you may know this already, but leaving your leaves rather than bagging them up is a great way not only to recycle them, but and to improve your landscape. It's leaves, as they decompose, they release valuable nutrients that can be released, that can be used in your flower beds, around your trees and your shrubs. So put it simply, leave the leaves, they do nothing but help. And then lastly, while one is always greater than none, if you really want to attract butterflies to your yard, it's important to have mass plantings of a single species. Large masses of a single color are actually more attractive than plantings of many mixed colors together. And this is also true for host plants. A single host plant is not going to be enough to feed a caterpillar. For example, the monarch caterpillar can actually eat an entire leaf of milkweed in just 5 minutes. And so you'd need at least 3 to 6 plants per caterpillar just to properly feed these species. So one is not enough. Mass plantings is the answer here. So now that you know how to provide for them, let's talk about 7 common butterflies that we have in this area. There are obviously plenty more that we do have. This is just some of the ones that I've picked up that we have enough time. So in the next few slides, I'm going to be going over 7 of the common butterflies that we have and their host plants and their preferred adult nectar sources. And when we talk about host plants, I want you to keep in mind generalists versus specialists. And for those of you who don't know those terms, a generalist refers to a species that can feed on a wide variety of things and or can thrive in various environments, whereas specialists are species that eat a very limited diet and or occupy a much narrow niche. So just keep that in mind when we go over the different host plants and nectar plants for these species. And I'll also be talking about adult nectar sources for these species. And you might be thinking, well, Kat, aren't all the nectar sources the same for all the same species? Well, yes, nectar is nectar. And if you have it, they're going to drink it. But what I have listed on the coming slides is preferred nectar sources. Just like to me, a street taco is a street taco, but I have my favorite place, right? I'm sure we all have that one that we prefer more than others. And if it's there, we're going to go. Same thing with butterflies and nectar. And this is what I'll be going over, is these species' preferred nectar sources, which are flowers that they are frequently seen using, which doesn't mean that they're what you have to have in your yard if you want to see them. It's just what they prefer. So if your neighbor has it, they might go over there. So to begin, I'll start with the best, monarch. And I will mention, I do have the larval stage and the adult stage pictures for you guys to see. Sometimes it's obvious that this is its caterpillar. Sometimes they look nothing alike. So I just wanted to have both here for you. But the monarch is one of the most recognizable species in North America. They're known for their marvelous migration from Canada to Mexico or California. And Texas is an important state for the migration because it's situated between the breeding grounds in the north and the overwintering areas in Mexico. We will see monarchs in early September as they fly through to Mexico, and then again in March as they return north to breed. During these months of pass-through, though, it is important that Texans have their larval host plant in their yards, which is milkweed. Monarchs are specialists, so meaning that they need milkweed in their larval stage to survive. It's the only host plant for this species. So I have here listed some of their most common native milkweed that we can find here. Swamp milkweed, butterfly weed, antelope horns, green milkweed, and aquatic milkweed. And in my experience, finding native milkweed plants is tricky. Seeds seem to be readily available from some different online sources. However, the Smart Plant Shopper slide I went over is a good place to start when looking to purchase native milkweed. Now, I do want to mention one species to avoid, which is tropical milkweed, and you've probably seen it here. You might even have it in your yard. This species is native to Mexico, and while it's risen in popularity to fill demand because it's usually available, the downfall of tropical milkweed is that due to its hardiness, it doesn't readily die back in the winter. And this can confuse monarchs, signaling that they've reached their destination, and then they don't continue to migrate further to Mexico for winter. And this becomes problematic if we have a hard freeze because the monarch and its caterpillars will not survive the winter. The other issue that you may know with tropical milkweed is OE, and please don't make me try to say it. But it's a parasite whose primary host is the monarch. And so if your tropical milkweed is not cut back in the winter, then monarchs that get infected with OE will leave behind spores of the parasite on the plant. Okay. And then concentrations of this OE is going to build up, infecting any monarchs that subsequently will visit the plant. And so for these reasons, we say that milkweed is a no-grow species. And the best way to support monarchs is to find native milkweed in our species to plant in your landscape. Some of the favorite nectar sources for the monarch is going to be mistflower, lantana, sunflowers, frostweed, and goldeneye. All right, the next species we're going to talk about is the pipevine swallowtail. Pipevine swallowtails are found mostly in warm climates, foraging in open woodlands and meadows. They travel pretty much all around the United States, except for the Northwest. Their only native host plant for this area is Dutchman's pipevine and Virginia snakeroot, which are extremely hard to find. If you've searched, if you found them, let me know because they are very, very hard to find. However, white-veined Dutchman is fairly easy to find. It's non-native, but it's also non-invasive, and it's usually readily available. And normally I wouldn't recommend a non-native species. However, because this species is so specialized, without a host plant, their populations will die or decline. And so I wanted to give you an option if you wanted to have pipevine swallowtail in your yard. Some of their nectar sources are going to be lantana, frostweed, cardinal flower, phlox, and san verbena. And what you might want to take note of is that some of these adult nectar sources are going to bleed over as we go through the next couple of slides. So if you see lantana being a preferred nectar source for multiple species, it might let a light go off that maybe that's a good one to have in your yard. Fun fact about the pipevine swallowtail, and it's not specific just to this species. There's a couple of other species of butterflies that have this trait, but its host plant, pipevine, contains toxins. And these butterflies have evolved to use this toxin to their advantage. So as they feed, they're going to sequester these toxins in their bodies, making them poisonous to many predators, as both caterpillars and butterflies, which I thought was pretty cool. All right, the Gulf fritillary butterfly. It is one of the most commonly seen butterflies in Texas. They have several broods in the spring and the summer, and they reach peak populations through from August through November here in Texas. So that's when you'd probably see them the most frequently. In the spring, this species is going to migrate a little more to the central US to breed because, again, they can't tolerate cold weather. So they're going to migrate back down to the south, the southern portions of their range in late summer and fall, where their last generation will overwinter. The Gulf fritillaria is commonly found in open, sunny areas such as parks, woodland edges, roadsides, fields, and urban gardens. And this species, just like the pipevine swallowtail, also tastes bad to predators. As their caterpillars feed on passion flower plants, they absorb the toxins produced by that plant, And these toxins are stored in their bodies and remain present when they emerge as adult butterflies. And the toxins that they ingest when feeding on the host plant is what makes them taste so bad to predators. And so the Gulf fritillary host plant is passion flower, passion vine. There's many different native species here in Texas. I haven't had a problem finding passion flower. It's actually quite sold even at some of your big name stores like Lowe's and Home Depot. Just make sure you're doing your homework and looking at the right species. Some of their nectar sources are, again, look, we've seen mist flower and lantana now 2 or 3 times, aster, zinnia, butterfly bush, and verbena. Ooh. Okay, giant swallowtail. The giant swallowtail is one of the largest butterflies in North America and has a wingspan of up to 6 inches. The swallowtail ranges throughout much of the United States and is less common in the American Southwest and Southern California. It typically stays close to wooded areas and close to the ground, and it can be found in woodland areas and residential gardens alike. Well, this species is often valued in gardens because its striking appearance as an adult. Its larval stage can have a serious pest issue when it comes to citrus farms, which has earned its caterpillars the names of orange dog and orange puppy, which looks nothing like that. You can see. Actually, this caterpillar has a very unique appearance. If you see it up there in the top corner, it kind of looks like bird droppings. And that's how it camouflages itself. So most predators think it looks like bird droppings, and that's why they kind of stay away from it. But if that doesn't work, this species has a second backup plan to rid predators away. It's their backup defense mechanism to their look. And when disturbed, this caterpillar can squeeze out this weird orange substance out of its back of its head that's called osmeterium. And this substance is covered in like a really nasty, stinky chemical, emitting like a really foul smell. And so with the caterpillar already looking like bird poop, and then with the smell, it usually deters, the combination of that will usually deter predators. And once gone, the caterpillar will then pull that osmeterium back into itself for later use when it needs it again. So some of its host plants are going to be citrus plants, as I explained. Hop tree, Hercules club, which is a tree that's very unique looking if you haven't seen it before, and then Texas prickly ash. And adult nectar sources are going to include lantana, which we've seen now for all 4 species we've gone over, milkweed, coral honeysuckle, butterfly bush, and goldenrod. And now on to my favorite, the common buckeye. Common buckeye butterflies can be seen in our gardens for pretty much most of the year. They can't tolerate the cold, so they will overwinter somewhere else. But you can constantly see them in sunny areas like old fields, roadsides, gardens, and parks. And these species like to live with lower vegetation and a bit of bare ground. And as you can see, their host plants are a little bit more smaller ground cover type species. Buckeyes are also attracted to composite flowers, which these are flowers that look like one big flower, but it's actually made up of smaller flowers. And those smaller flowers are sometimes referred to as florets. The Asteraceae family, which used to be Compositaceae family, is made up of composite flowers like asters, daisies, sunflowers, and which is why it's in their preferred nectar sources. So some common host plants would be frog fruit, the ruella species, paintbrush, toadflax, Texas vervain, and then their nectar sources, of course, asters, sunflowers, daisies, milkweed, zinnias, and other composite flowers. Now on to the gray hair streak. It's our second to last species. The gray hair streak has more, the gray hair streak larvae actually has more host plants than any other North American butterfly species. And they are one of the most common species of hair streak in North America, ranging over the entire continent. They're most commonly found, common host plants are going to be in the pea and the mallow family, but I have a bunch listed here. Butterfly weed, false indigo bush, partridge pea, bluebonnet, wine cup, persimmon, hawthorn, Carolina buckthorn. And unlike most other butterflies, gray hair streaks really do not prefer one specific habitat. They're widespread in tropical forests, in open forests, temperate woodland areas. They can also be found in meadows, crop fields, neglected roadsides, and residential parks and yards. Some of their adult nectar sources are milkweed, goldenrod, dogbane, and tick trefoil. And what I wanted to mention real quick about the gray hair streak is it is our featured pollinator of the year for the Woodlands Township. So if you attended our Arbor Day, we gave away 2 single species seed packs, which were partridge pea and wine cup. And then we gave away 3 host plant trees, which were pecan, persimmon, and false indigo. We also used the same seeds and same host plants to plant at community tree planting at Falcon Wing Park. And so maybe next year you can go by and find a pollinator patch specific, tailored for the gray hair streak, and that's next to the basketball courts. And last but not least, the cloudless sulfur, which can also be called the cloudless giant sulfur, even though it's a mid-sized butterfly with a wingspan of about, I don't know, 3 inches, compared to the giant swallowtail that's 6. This species is most commonly found in the eastern United States and southern portions of the western United States. Their habitat includes disturbed open areas like parks, yards, gardens, beaches, road edges, abandoned fields, things like that. Sulfur butterflies exhibit migration and overwintering behavior that's similar to the monarch butterfly, but they do not travel as far or as in great of numbers. During the fall, sulfur butterflies are going to abandon their breeding sites in the northern reaches of the United States and travel south to Florida and other parts of the southern United States. And there they'll pretty much reside until the end of winter, when they can return north to the same breeding sites as the year before. Fun fact about the cloudless sulfur is that adult butterflies are very strongly attracted to red flowers. They're so much attracted to red flowers that they've been known to literally dive into the red lenses over car tail lights because they love it so much. Hence why their preferred nectar species are red plants like Turk's cap, lantana, salvia, cardinal flower, all red flowered species. They also have exceptionally long tongues that can allow them to reach the nectar of even the longest and most narrowest flowers. And their adults are as clever at camouflaging as their younger selves, typically resting on flowers that closely match the neon color of their wings. And some of their host plants are going to be partridge pea, the sennas, and then pecan. All right, so just some final tips and takeaways as we close out. When you want to create a butterfly garden, here's how you need to do it. First, you got to know and identify what invasive species that you currently have in your yard. No matter what your goal is, I promise you, invasive and non-native species are not going to be your answer. Second, you need to determine what your goal is for your garden. Is it aesthetics? Is it conservation? Is it education? What is it that you are wanting to do? Once you figure that out, then you can make a plan. I cannot stress enough the importance of making a plan before implementing something. Knowing from past failures, it's so important. And this plan should be based on the goals for your space. What I like to do is create a spreadsheet in Excel that lists all the plants I want and then all of their bloom times and then their heights. So I know exactly what I have as a source of nectar or food throughout the whole year for butterflies. Once you have all this information, then you can shop, which is the funnest part, right? But shop smart. Make sure you're using reputable sources and buying native plants. You have to do the research beforehand and make sure you're buying the native varieties of these species. Once you've done that, you can remove the invasives and replace in your yard and replace them with native host plants and nectar plants that are going to give you a source of food and blooms year round. After that, you really have nothing else to do but sit back and enjoy all the hard work, and you should really have butterflies in no time. And then lastly, don't keep this information to yourself. Just as I am sharing with you, share with someone else, spread the word so that we can all help our environment. And with that, I'm pretty much done. So thank you for listening to my talk.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Again, I told you I don't watch any of these without learning a lot. I think it was interesting you pointed out at the first about the effective invasives. I hadn't really thought about the fact that no matter what it is, that's growing invasive or not, it's taking a lot of the nutrients out of the soil. So if you have these nutrient sucking invasives next to others that no longer can compete,
Right.
so you lose a lot of those that are native to the soup. I had one question that someone asked about why aren't laws put in place to prevent the sale and purchase of invasive plants? That's probably come up
It's
before, I think.
I'm honestly not sure, but my best answer would be it's America, baby. And people are allowed to do what they want to do. And that's why it's so important for educators like myself and yourself to let people know so that while it may be available, it's not something we're going to do. And even if it was illegal to prevent the sale and purchase of invasive plants, that's not going to solve the problem. It's education and how
Well,
we, can make smarter choices for ourselves.
yeah, you said it in a very nice way about Texas, but I think it's important to it's all like all retail products,
Mhm.
they're going to provide what the people want.
Correct.
And I think that purpose we have is to educate folks about the problems with tallow trees and elephant ears. In fact, I sent a picture to some of my friends the other week. I was at Home Depot and they had two large boxes just filled with giant elephant ear bulbs.
They're beautiful. They're a
And
beautiful plant.
they are
And Houston, especially, is a melting pot. We have people from all different parts of the world. And
right.
what's native here is not native there. And so
Yep.
people come here not knowing that. And they're like, well, this did well in my yard, or I saw this on the road.
Well, I was almost going to get a sign and practice civil disobedience and plead, do not buy these bulbs. And the same with tallow trees. I said, you're
Right.
right. I know around here they were specially grown because they had pretty colors in the fall.
Yep.
And they also have 100,000 seeds that flow along with the water and rain.
Yep.
And there's some lakes around here that have a tallow tree around every square foot around that lake.
And they're
So,
hard to get rid of.
right. I had a question about um, I became a believer 2 years ago. I put as many native plants over the last 3 as I could. And after both freezes, they went down to the ground, right? Froze to the ground. And yet every one of them has come back from lantana to everything else, shrimp plants and Turk's cap. But my problem seems to be that when the butterflies are just now starting to migrate, the blooms aren't there. And it doesn't happen until summer. So is that something you just have to plant early or
That's why I said the power of the Excel sheet. There are species that do only bloom in winter, like witch hazel. It's a tree that blooms in the winter and it offers a source of nectar and food for the species when normal spring blooming plants aren't bloomed yet. So that's why it's really important to have it listed out by month to see what color and what species is blooming when, so you can fill in the holes.
but if lantana uh when it does bloom, I still see butterflies. And I guess one of the questions I have, and I need to read more about it, but which butterflies hang around here and which ones don't? I mean, they could just continue on with their northerly or southerly migration.
Oh, you're asking like what species are going to be around during the winter to utilize or
Well, no,
during the
no,
spring?
in the summer, basically, that all of them stay around here for the summer or not.
I wouldn't know an exact answer. I know a lot of them are here during the summer.
Okay.
Uh, Monarchs, you'll see them in March and September, so just right before.
Well, I won't give up. I have two comments. Thanks for the inspiration, Kat, and great information. Very well presented.
Yeah.
A question too about plans to go to the streets, the parkways, and along roads and along our paths.
To
Does
remove
the
what
Woodlands,
invasive
do the
species?
Woodlands have any plans to remove invasive plants? And I just wanted to mention kind of an advertisement for the Woodlands Green. We have a task force that has been working on invasive species, especially the potatoes and my favorite tallow trees. So we have a task force that's been doing that for a long time, trying to do our best to go along the pathways, and we work in conjunction with the Woodlands. And if Perry's there, can you chime in about the efforts as well as that? Perry there? I don't hear. Maybe when she hears me, we can put her on.
Well, I know, oh,
There's
Terry, you're
Terry.
muted.
I think I have to have my camera on for my mic to work, apparently. So,
That's okay. You look fine.
Environmental Services and Woodlands Green have collaborated for a number of years now for both training and volunteering opportunities. And Woodlands Green has taken on the task of managing the volunteer workday schedules, and we and they again partner to recruit and train residents and others in the area. We draw heavily on Woodlands Green members, but also master naturalists in the area, and our student ambassadors from the Woodlands Green are a tremendous help with invasive species work around. So if I'm remembering correctly from my wrap up at the end of 2023, I believe the task force removed just short of 9,000 pounds of invasive species material from pathways and green spaces. So yes, that work goes on, but township covers a lot of space. So the township does have contracts with some landscape companies, and they do work on vines, vines in general, and some invasive species, but they're part of, as you can imagine, township is a big space, a lot of other tasks. So if anybody who's here wants to help with removal of invasive species from public spaces, green spaces, pathways, reach out to Kat, reach out to me, reach out to Woodlands Green, and we'll get you started. As Kat mentioned, there's a training coming up on August 17. Kat, I'm sorry, I did not notice that it says August 19 on your slide, but it is August 17, and it's going to be at the township offices in room 150. So that QR code is a easy way. Would you put it back to, yeah, that QR code is an easy way to sign up to attend that class. Ashley Morgan Olvera, who is the education director for Texas Invasive Species Institute at Sam Houston State University, will be our instructor. It's 8:30 to noon, and I promise, as Paul mentioned about this class tonight, you will learn something. So we'd love to see you join us for that. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks a lot. I think especially a good class to go to, because I had no idea what an air potato was 5 years ago, and now I loathe them. And I think we've done good. I still walk the paths, and I've seen a lot of areas today that are still clean that were just covered up with those vines 3 or 4 years ago. So if you learn to, and another, if you learn to identify these things, you can also email the Woodlands Green and tell us whether you found them, where you might be, so that that can be followed up on. I think the other one I wanted to mention that as far as the native plants, I asked John, and Terry and John can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the Woodlands Water Agency will give rebates for certain plants. There's a list of plants that you can buy. And that if you keep the receipt and turn those in to the Woodlands Water, if you live within the Woodlands Water Agency, the Woodlands proper, then you can get a rebate on your water bill.
John may be on his phone and not easily able to answer, but yes, if you
Okay.
use this link, you can access the rebate list. There's many things that Woodlands Water will rebate on your water bill if you're a customer of theirs. But there's a lengthy list of native plants, trees, shrubs, vines, and if you purchase them and make sure that it's easy to see on the receipt that they are qualifying plants, yes, you can get a rebate of 50% of what you spend, up to a lifetime maximum rebate of $150 on your water bill. So it's a good
Yeah.
deal no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too, because that brings me to the subject of how much these plants love rainwater. And if you get a rain barrel, you can also get a rebate from the Woodlands Agency. So that's something to keep in mind. And you mentioned, we talked about why they continue to sell the things. It's demand, and I think it's important. I don't like to do advertisements, but these nurseries that are listed here, they need our support. I mean, that tell your friends to here's where you can buy these things. And as time goes on, hopefully other stores will understand that there's a market for that and will change that. Changing attitudes. I think that's all I have.
Thanks to everyone for showing up tonight. And thanks, Kat. You did great.
Thank
You did. And keep in mind, I said it's I sent an article the other day out to everybody that, as Kat said, 90% of our monarchs are gone basically. And this year was just as bad as any other. So it's really drastically important that we take this to heart. It's all hooked together.
Mhm.
So thanks again. Thanks, Terry, for helping me out, and for John and everybody else that came. I said it, a lot of people, and it's going to be recorded or has been recorded. And John will see that we put that on to the Woodlands Green site. So if you have a friend that wasn't able to be there tonight, somebody that needs lessons in life, tell them to log in. In a few days, it'll be on the website. Thanks, Kat, and thanks everybody for taking time. All right. Good night.
Good night.